Hi everybody, Scott here. A few weeks ago I received some interesting questions from a subscriber around the INFJ paradox, if you like. And the questions were: INFJs in the workplace, being invisible, mistakenly being viewed as not a team player. The second point was INFJs' challenges interacting with less deep MBTI types, and INFJs in a family system. So the best way to, I think, begin exploring these topics and questions is to show you a brief illustration to help sort of paint a bit of a picture of where these challenges come from. So this can be just a simple illustration to help show or help explain why INFJs can have challenges in these areas of life. The best way or a way of describing it, and it certainly doesn't cover everything, it's just a simple way of saying this might be why INFJs struggle. So there are certainly more senses on the planet than intuitives. And I don't want this necessarily be a sense or intuitive diagram, but it's more just a way of saying this is kind of what it can look like for an INFJ at least. For an INFJ, it can feel like a lot of people occupy like the sensory world, like the here and now, the five senses and all of that sort of thing. And if we looked at this line as like, the ground, the earth, it's like people occupy a lot of people occupy the sensory world, and maybe a little bit of depth. Not that senses aren't deep, but it's a different kind of deep, let's put it that way. And there are types that just don't like going much further down than that. It's like it's a little overwhelming, or it's not necessary, or they just don't feel comfortable down there. And so they're open to looking at things a little, on a deep way, but usually they're much more comfortable up here in this more sensory, factual, data type space. But for the INFJ, where they occupy their space is sort of down here to like maybe here. And we could kind of look at this as like SE, if you like, or this is all SE. And the INFJ occupies, and down here is NI. It's like they occupy this kind of space. And so there's very little, there is overlap, but it's very little. So the INFJ can sort of come up above the surface to a certain extent, but isn't really comfortable out here. It's not the INFJ's natural habitat. They much prefer to be down in here. And so the INFJ only feels known, in a sense, to this extent. And so in a family of origin, or within a workplace or friendship, sometimes the INFJ, this is all that people are seeing of them, when there's a whole lot more depth there that either just gets dismissed because it's misunderstood or not even noticed. So in these sorts of environments, the INFJ can be sharing information that it's gathering from down here and put it up in here, or even put it, in a sense, up in here, and it's just not, it's misunderstood, it's dismissed because it doesn't seem to come from a logical sequence, or doesn't seem to have much, obvious practical application, and so it can get missed. And in a sense, for the INFJ, the challenge is to get the information from down here and somehow find a way to communicate it up here so it's receivable and understandable. Of course, it's probably worth noting that an INFJ is desiring quite strongly for people to come down here and understand this world. And I guess in a sense it requires a little bit of both. It requires the INFJ flexing their type a little bit in order to be able to be understood and received up in this area of the world. And it's helpful for others to recognize the difference of NI and the INFJ, and make some effort to get to know and understand this deeper part. So the best place to start is looking at the family system and some of the challenges that INFJs can have in certain family system environments. So just generally speaking, if an INFJ finds themselves being the only INFJ in the family, or the only introvert, or the only intuitive in the family, or even the only feeler in the family, those sorts of things can just be natural challenges for people. Doesn't necessarily need to lead to significant challenges, but just adjusting to that can be challenging, both for other family members and the INFJ. But it really does come down to the health, if you like, of a family system. If it's a rigid family system that only sees one style of communicating or processing information, if it only sees that in one way, and it just happens that the INFJ is outside what the other family members considers normal, then that can be very challenging for an INFJ. In fact, I mean, it's challenging for anybody in that situation. And what that can do is, it's a form, if you like, it's a form of rejection, but because it happens in childhood, the child doesn't know. It just seems normal for the child, so the child just naturally learns to shut down parts of themselves, or sort of try and be like the others in the family to feel accepted and to fit in. So I think what can happen for an INFJ is that deeper part of self doesn't get any light on it, in a sense that a good way of describing that is when a child, before the age of 7, and let's say someone steals their pencil and they feel angry or sad about it, a healthy parent's going to get down really close with that child and help them to identify what they're feeling, and give a name to what is happening for the child, whether it's anger or sadness or fear. And then the child gets to understand this emotion and have that name for it. And in that sense, they get to understand more their emotions and the internal world. So for the INFJ, who basically lives in their internal world, if no one's helping them to recognize what's in there and what it is and affirm it and accept it, then an INFJ can sort of, it's not that they lose their introverted intuition, but it's like it operates it's difficult to describe because NI is often unconscious, but let's say it's like more unconscious, like there's very little sort of conscious awareness of it. So it's almost like, and I've seen this in people, that there can be INFJs that have this deep inner world, but they've never shared it with anybody. No one's ever been in there with them, and so they're in it, but they don't know that they're in it. And the picture is kind of like it's black, but not like a bad black. It's just there's not a lot of light in there. I don't think I'm explaining it particularly well. I'm going to give it another go. A bit like the emotion. Now the child feels. Now, let's say they didn't have a parent that acknowledged those emotions and gave them names, fear, anger, sadness, things like that. Then the child's going to grow up and they're going to still have those emotions, but they're not. They're going to be more in them and not really noticing them, if you like. So they're going to have times where they're angry and sad, but they're not going to have much awareness around what it is or how to deal with it, because they just haven't had other people around them to sort of affirm and help them understand and process that emotion. So for the INFJ, it can be similar in that they can have all of these things going on the inside, but if there's no one there to kind of help them bounce that around or name it or describe it or affirm it, then they're in it, but they don't know that they're in it, or that they don't have names to describe what's going on the inside. I hope that makes sense. And so for some INFJs, they can grow up in a sense of, there's a stuckness in that you can ask them lots and lots of questions, or just ask them questions and they don't have answers, because they're not used to having people trying to draw things out of them or find out about them. They've learned to shut that down and be misunderstood, and so there can be like a blockedness or a stuckness in their NI. And what it requires for the INFJ, what can be helpful is when somebody else helps them to identify that deeper place, acknowledge it, speak into it. And it's kind of like it helps to sort of shine lights on the inside of the INFJ so that they can recognize this place that they've always been in, but it just they haven't had the kind of conscious awareness of that deeper place. So having other people around to speak into that can be very empowering and enlightening for the INFJ. So it's like it switches the NI on to their own conscious awareness. This is what it is. No, it's not just for INFJs, but there are INFJs that they're like old souls. They're always seeking truth and the reasons for things and the why of things. And for a family where they're not interested in depth, they're not interested in the why of things. They're just interested in what's actually happening. Then sometimes for an INFJ, they can be a threat to other people. And if we're looking at it from the family system, and it depends on the health of the family, if an INFJ is asking questions, they're seeing the deeper issues or the deeper, the deeper spaces that are going on within a situation. If they start speaking that truth out into a family where they don't want to know truth, they don't want to look at their own issues and things like that, then the INFJ becomes a real threat to the system, and so the INFJ can get shut down, and that can be very challenging for anybody in that situation, but especially for the INFJ. So the healthy family is going to just recognize that the INFJ is different. The INFJ has a different way of thinking, a different way of seeing the world, and a different way of communicating what they see in the world. And for a healthy family, they're going to embrace that. They're going to accept it. They're going to affirm that part of the INFJ and help the INFJ to recognize these areas of uniqueness within their personality type and grow in them. So for a lot of INFJs, because they often don't feel heard or understood in their family of origin, or if that happens for them, they learn to become listeners, and there's two reasons for that, I think. The first one is that INFJs, I think, are naturally good listeners because they like to observe and understand just naturally. But when you add the fact that they can feel misunderstood and they can feel shut down and not heard, then that sort of exacerbates that listening part of them, and they just become listeners. So INFJs could find themselves in friendships where one's a talker and the other's a listener, and they'll find themselves being in that listening space. And INFJs, I think, enjoy listening to people, but within friendships and dealing with other sorts of personality types, the INFJ just doesn't. Like, people want to know the INFJ, but the INFJs learnt that they don't feel and understood when they communicate, so they don't communicate much. They keep a lot inside, and that can be frustrating for other types that actually want to get to know them. And for some types, that silence, if you like, that INFJs can have can be misunderstood, seen as, aloof or standoffish or things like that. But that's really just a misunderstanding. I think for the most part, INFJs aren't those things at all. They've just learnt to be listeners. So it's important for INFJs to, if that's happening for them, to recognise that and develop an assertiveness where they actually state, like, I want to talk, or I need to talk, or I want to talk about a certain topic. Would you just listen? Would you, give me some airtime? And that can be helpful for the INFJ to continue or begin to share themselves and share what they think with those around them. So there can be this sort of added complexity that because INFJs have tried communicating in their family of origin and felt shut down, not in all cases, but in some cases, they learn to be quiet and sort of reserved and maybe, feel a bit sidelined. And again, I just want to state that that's not the case for all INFJs at all, but I think this can be a common challenge for INFJs under certain circumstances. That people develop their own understanding or interpretation of the INFJ, and then or perception, and then other people talk to the INFJ from their own perception of what they think the INFJ is. And then the INFJ is looking at them going, who are you talking to? This isn't, whoever you're talking to is not me. And that can be really frustrating for an INFJ if they find themselves in that kind of situation. I guess it exacerbates this not feeling known issue. Hence the importance for INFJs to be communicating and expressing themselves so that people can get to know them. So just to reiterate that, INFJs can sometimes find themselves in situations where it's like a person's talking to them, and the INFJ's like internally looking around, going, "Who are you talking to me? Like whoever you're talking to or relating to is not who I am," and that can be a little bit paradoxical. And that could probably be particularly true within the workplace, which is the third topic of this video, INFJs in the workplace. That, I think, INFJs, obviously they're introverted, so they're more geared to, gather tasks and just go away and do them on their own. And complete those tasks. And a lot of INFJs are quite individualistic in the sense that they don't necessarily work really well within group dynamics and group settings and group brainstorming and meetings and all of that, because when they're in those situations, they're they'd be preferring to think rather than speak. And of course, something I've mentioned in other videos is that we do live in an extroverted culture that values extroverted traits, and so workplaces are often, they think that the only way of working is within group settings and meetings and open plan offices and all of this sort of stuff, and which is really not the natural habitat for an INFJ. It'd be quite draining being in those environments all day. So part of the point that my subscriber was making was, his point was, INFJs in the workplace being invisible and mistakenly viewed as not a team player. So I think in regards to the invisible piece, I think INFJs both feel invisible, or this is what can happen. They can feel invisible, and they also probably want to be invisible in certain scenarios. INFJs are often the quiet observer. Not all the time, not every INFJ is like that, but I think a lot of INFJs are more the quiet observer, because their NI, whenever they're in a group scenario, their NI is just processing and they're thinking, and the INFJ is off in their subconscious somewhere. And of course, a lot of working environments, office environments, it's all about extroverting everything. Extrovert it, put it out there, put it out there, put it out there. And often INFJs are not ready to put it out there, and that can just be challenging when they feel like they should say something, when they're not actually ready to have something to say. And then if they say something when they're not ready to, it can come out a little bit jumbled. It's like not a well-formed thought yet. So it's really important, and it's something, Susan Cain is a big proponent of this, and I certainly see its value in workplaces growing up, in the sense that they value different styles of work and different styles of creativity and productivity, and allow spaces for different types to be able to do good work. One of the other ways INFJs can feel invisible or appear to not be a team player is in the area of competitiveness. I think there are a lot of INFJs it's like they're allergic to competition. They're just not interested in it because it doesn't stimulate good ideas or stimulate creativity. It could actually stifle it. Competition can be stressful, and that stress can lead to a lack of creativity or a lack of drive. I think INFJs have a natural drive, their own sort of drive, and they don't need, people trying to compete against them to stimulate that drive. In fact, if anything, it can sometimes just stifle the drive, because it's not how INFJs get motivated. That's not 100% the case. I think we can all find ourselves in spaces where we want to be better than somebody else and all of that. But I think just as a general rule, INFJs can not be interested in that style of that dynamic that can happen in workplaces. In a sense, an INFJ is usually competing with themselves. There's this constant drive to improve, to self-actualize, to overcome their own challenges. They place their own challenges over them, and that's usually a private set of challenges where they compete against themselves, in the sense that they want to overcome certain challenges or self-actualize, if you like, in a certain way. And that doesn't necessarily require others in the sense of direct competition. It's probably going to be happening within relationship and within the context of others, but it's all happening internally. They're not interested in challenging other people. They have a tendency to unsettle people without them knowing it. Because the old soul, if you like, is able to see through a lot of the facades of people, a lot of the games that people play, and a lot of the self-protecting that people do. And maybe that's a topic for another, a longer video, but what that can look like is the INFJ can feel like they're kind of being hit with stuff from other people, because the other people can feel threatened by the INFJ's ability to see through them. And that can lead to people doing self-protective type behaviors, whether it's just forms of rejection or ostracization or game playing, whatever it could be, or intimidation or aggression. It can just be people's protector parts that they develop to protect themselves that kind of get thrown at the INFJ or inflicted on the INFJ because the INFJ can see through it. And that can be challenging for an INFJ being in those sorts of environments. Hence why I think that can be one of the reasons why INFJs can find themselves being a little reclusive and wanting to be by themselves or work by themselves or minimize social engagement. I don't think it's the reason, but I think it can be part of the reason why INFJs can do that. And I think it's just important for INFJs to recognize that those protectors are about them. Sorry, it's about the other person, and that whatever the protector is trying to, the protectors and the other people, whatever they're trying to scapegoat or dump on the INFJ is not theirs at all. It's simply the insecurity and it's simply just the insecurity of other people trying to deflect the INFJ's ability to see through them by playing those sorts of protector games. And what the protectors and people don't realize is the more that people do that, the more the INFJ can see through them. So that can be just a very paradoxical, challenging environment for some INFJs if they find themselves in that sort of dynamic, whether it's within a friendship circle or a workplace. However, it's probably more likely to happen for the old soul type INFJ who is always searching for deeper and deeper truth and understanding of the world and people and spirituality and all of these sorts of things. It's probably those types of INFJs that are going to have more of those sorts of challenges. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more about INFJ, their challenges with interacting with other types. My subscriber mentioned that, is it true that INFJs are the most dissatisfied with relationships and jobs and career and so on? I don't know if they're the most dissatisfied, but I think some of the reasons and some of the things that I've mentioned in this video points to the reason why INFJs might be dissatisfied in those areas. In the area of relationship, if an INFJ has not felt known in their childhood, then that can be an unmet childhood need that needs to be met in adulthood. And if that's the case, then the INFJ almost needs to do that for themselves. And that's why I think INFJs get quite attracted to the MBTI, is because the MBTI becomes that sort of affirming voice to their deeper selves, and it's that affirmation that the INFJ gets through the MBTI that is quite powerful. And of course, INFJs, they want to be known at a deep level, and they want to relate to others at a really deep level. And the illustration that I provided before speaks to why that's often a challenge for the INFJ. So if you do have an INFJ in your world, you don't necessarily need to fully get the depth, if you like, of the INFJ, but accepting and letting them know that you accept their depth and that you seek to understand and desire to understand more that deeper process can be incredibly powerful for the friendship or the relationship. And you'll have a friend for life if you provide that gift to the INFJ. And like I illustrated in the picture, INFJs need to do a little bit of flexing to package what they're feeling or thinking or knowing in a receivable form to those that don't share that same function or that same depth, that depth of function, if you like. And vice versa, others need to acknowledge that the INFJ thinks differently and that there is actually value in what the INFJ has to offer. And so it requires sort of an open-mindedness from others, and also a conscious effort for the INFJ to communicate things in a way that is more receivable. And in that sense, you've got a little bit more, connectedness between the different types. So no doubt I'm going to think of other things that I should have probably shared in this video, but that's all I have for now, and I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in another video.